Hi there, and welcome back to On Air with B&B.
I'm Brittany.
And I'm Bethany. We are two mental health therapists with real talk and mental health issues that matter. So today we're going to be talking about positive reinforcement techniques that can be utilized with children and adolescents. And I want to kind of just start with what, kind of like we do with every video, like what is that? What is positive reinforcement? So it's really just, they say it's a parenting tactic, but I'm going to say it's a tactic that everyone can use, you know, teachers, coaches, parents, caregivers, whoever. If you're working with a kid, it can be used.
Yeah.
So it's a tactic that focuses on noticing your child's appropriate behavior when it's happening, rewarding it in order to like, and when I say rewarding it, like that can be like praise, that can be, you know, with attention, that can be with like a tangible or physical reward, an experience, one of the above, in order to, you know, recognize that they're doing a behavior that you want to see to replace a behavior that we do not want to see.
Correct.
Okay. They call it a maladaptive behavior. I just call it an unwanted behavior. Right. Okay. So how is positive reinforcement helpful, do you think?
Yeah, like it's super helpful because it allows us to bring to light and focus on the positive desired behaviors that we want our children to exhibit, right? So for example, if Johnny is in class, right, for our teachers who are tuning in, and you notice that maybe Johnny is typically a little bit more reserved, but after having a parent-teacher conference, you know, you kind of told the parents, and then the parents had a conversation with Johnny and was like, hey, you gotta like participate a little bit more in class. And then you're noticing that at least he's trying, right?
Right.
In class. And as a teacher, you can positively reinforce that by, you know, maybe acknowledging like after that lesson, like, hey, good job trying today. Like I'm noticing it and I'm kind of bringing it to light because it's a positive characteristic or trait that we want exhibited more frequently, right?
Yeah. So it's definitely super, super helpful. The way that it like works basically, you know, and some of the stuff is going to sound a little repetitive, is just, you know, kind of having the aim be like, again, focusing on the positive. So, you know, I guess an example would be like Brittany just gave, you know, like good job trying today in class, or, you know, some people have different opportunities. You're basically noticing kids are making mistakes, right? Because we all make mistakes. And then you're recognizing the positive part of that mistake, because there typically is a positive part, okay? The intent is usually good, okay? And then we're noticing that and using it as like an opportunity for learning, right? Okay? So the goal is kind of like to catch them when they're doing good. So if you have, like yesterday, we had an intake in the office, new little boy, 5 years old, lots of behaviors that we, you know, unwanted behaviors. But there were also, you know, a lot of positive behaviors sprinkled in to the 90-minute session that we were doing. And, you know, one of our clinicians, Savannah, she did such a good job. You know, the parents, they were like, you know, don't put your feet on the couch, or stop banging that, you know, stop doing this, stop doing that, redirecting, because, you know, they're in somebody else's office. They want their kid to be respectful. I totally get it. And then Savannah, one of our clinicians, shout out to Savannah. She was doing such a good job at noticing the positive behaviors. Like, thank you for asking. Thank you for saying, you know, please. Good job, you know, making eye contact. There were so many things that I really liked how you said, you know, yada, yada. And so she was really noticing all of the positive things that he was doing, even though there were so many unwanted behaviors happening. And she was modeling that so that they could see that this is how it works. This is how positive reinforcement works. And then they're going to be like, wow, they're noticing me doing the positive things. because this works for everyone, adults, children. I mean, I don't know about you. I do love my job, but I probably wouldn't go as often if, I didn't receive a paycheck, right? Like, let's be honest.
That's your reinforcement.
That's my positive reinforcement. I'm getting paid. And then I get to use that money for things that I need or want, right? Okay. So if we're not rewarding the behavior that we want to see, and we're only focusing on the behaviors that we don't want to see, then we're not going, it's much more likely that the behaviors that we want to see are not going to occur
right
over and over, and that the behaviors that we are noticing, even though it's negative attention typically and consequences, are going to be the behaviors that we're going to see more so than the positive ones.
Yeah. It just sounds like we just have the positive reinforcement, right? It's just very intentional, right?
Yeah, you have to find what motivates the child.
Right.
So I always explain it to my parents as we have to make kids aware. So the intentional, we have to make them aware of the behavior. And in order to do that, we have to find, you remember the donkey? Maybe it was a donkey, and they tied like a stick and a string and a carrot, and that's how they got the donkey to like move and plow the field. I mean, this is a cartoon I'm talking about. Maybe they really did this. I don't know.
Right.
I saw it in a cartoon, but I always use that example as like, dang, you got to find your kids carrots.
Right.
Okay. We got to find something, some type, whether it's attention, praise, tangible rewards, experiences, something along those lines, to motivate them to pay attention to the behavior that we don't want them to do, and more to the attention to the behavior that we do want them to do.
Right.
Is that what you mean by intention?
Yeah,
okay.
Like we're just bringing to light, and you're kind of setting the expectations too, like moving forward. Because it's one thing to say like, no, Susie, don't do this. No, Johnny, I don't like that. No, John, we don't behave like this, or take your feet off the couch, right? Cool. Like we're kind of like telling them what not to do, right? But studies show that it's just so much more effective, especially with children and adolescents. And yes, this could be applied for everyone across the board, like all individuals, but specifically for children and adolescents, like there's so much research that shows and supports that positive reinforcement is a lot more beneficial and a lot more effective to see positive behaviors rather than negative consequence.
I have a really great question. What would, because I get this all the time, and even I'm like, oh, I really got to think about this. What is like the difference between positive reinforcement and say like bribing your kid? Okay, because I have parents ask me that all the time. So like, am I like bribing my kid?
You're basically telling me to bribe my child. Well, in theory, there's really no, I mean, it looks very similar, right? But it's very different in principle. What do I mean by this? So what is bribery? If you're at the movie theater, like, hey, stop yelling during the movie and I'll go get your candy after the movie. It's a little different than before, like, and that's kind of like during the movie, right? Like, however, if you're before walking into the movie theater, you're like, hey, Susie, or hey, Johnny, like, remember, what are you working for? I'm working for candy after the movie. Okay, and how can you earn that candy after the movie? Well, I just have to have quiet voices throughout the movie and not be disruptive, right? So it looks very different.
Back to that intention. You set the intention by setting
the expectation. So what is the expectation? I have to be quiet during the movie, right?
And
not be disruptive.
I will get rewarded.
And then I get a reward of this candy at the end.
Whereas
right?
I feel like bribing is more like in the moment.
Yes.
Like we're in the grocery store, you're not behaving, like I keep telling you to stop. I'm getting embarrassed as a parent, which I have before, by the way. I'm not as embarrassed anymore.
Yeah.
But when I was a newer parent, I was extremely embarrassed anytime my kid was like throwing a tantrum or like acting out. and your initial instinct is like, what can I do to get them to stop quickly because this is so embarrassing. You know, so, but that's not, there's no expectation. Like the expectation is being told after the fact, right? It's not intentional.
Right. And we have to be very mindful of being very intentional with this, because I want to circle back to the bribery and kind of like the examples that we've already, you know, provided to you guys. Be mindful, because bribery can kind of have like a negative effect. And like, what do I mean by that? Like, if a kid's like in the grocery store and realizing like, oh, I'm not getting my candy or I'm not getting anything, then I'm going to act out so that my parent or my caretaker or grandma who's in the store with me can like get me to be quiet or get what they want, because I'm ultimately getting what I'm wanting, right? In that moment. So I think, you know, going the positive reinforcement route, which is very intentional, you're setting the expectation, the adult is essentially in control rather than bribery. It kind of feels like the child
is in control. Definitely.
And that's kind of like how I explain it to my parents. Now, in theory,
that's a really good way to explain it.
Yeah, it's in theory.
I'm stealing that.
Yeah, anytime. But no, it looks very similar to a third party, right? But it's just, it is relatively night and day.
Yeah, you in control versus the child in control. So I guess regarding like positive reinforcement and being in control, like what are some examples that we can give our viewers as ways to positively reinforce their kids?
So for me, it depends, I think, on the age and the developmental stages of the child and the adolescent. So I can start with younger and then work my way up to older. Okay. How's that sound?
That actually works.
Okay. So so for like my younger clients and my younger kiddos from, you know, 2, which we do see kiddos as young as 2, 2.5, right? So 2, 2.5 till about 5 or 6 based off of their reading skills. I really love PECS. And so what are PECS? PECS. So it stands for Picture Exchange Communication Systems, okay? And it's very helpful because it's no word. You don't have to read. You just have to be able to identify what the picture is. So for our very young clients that are like in the toddler stages or can't read just yet, this is super helpful. And you can have a picture of what they're working for, like what they're trying to earn, the motivator, the positive reinforcement. That can be a lollipop or any candy or chocolate. That can even be a gummy. That could be, you know, you could put a picture of a playground and they can go outside. You could put a picture of a ball.
Pictures of like a TV or an iPad. I mean, they have every picture.
Favorite toy.
They have everything.
Yeah, and you could look at these things on Teachers Pay Teachers. You can even get just regular pictures from Google searches and print it out on your own. And you could just say, hey, you're working for this, right? Like, are you working for this, or is this like, do you want this? And they're going to be like, oh yeah, like I want to do this. And then you're going to have that conversation where you set the expectation. Okay, in order to get this lollipop, or in order to play a game with mom or dad, or in order to get your video game, or to have, you know, TV for Bluey, or whatever the toddler likes, because that's what we're focusing on right now, they can earn that by doing whatever the expectation is. Okay, well, let's clean up Legos. So first clean up your Legos, and then you get, you know, whatever the motivator is, correct? Or especially if you're trying to like teach a new skill. With toddlers, positive reinforcement is super helpful. Reason being, something new is different, and different sometimes can be associated as, well, yes, challenging, but it's very adversive for different reasons, because new can be uncomfortable. Right. And so we acknowledge that as clinicians. And then with new can also present different challenges, because it's just not something that they're accustomed to, and they may mess it up. Right. And getting something wrong for a toddler can be very frustrating.
Well, getting something wrong for me is frustrating.
Yeah. And so it's just really helpful to use positive reinforcement for toddlers or any child or adolescent that's trying to learn a new skill or technique, because it's something that is different. It's something that's out of the norm, that they're uncomfortable typically doing, and that you want them to engage or practice. So if they're like, even for like our older kiddos, like learning a new instrument, or, you know, learning different math problems, or even how to spell, right? Like, having that motivator in place.
Crossword puzzles is my kiddos. She gets a crossword puzzle for spelling each week. She loathes crossword puzzles.
So anything that's like non-preferred, very new, very different, uncomfortable, something that's hard, something that's going to present challenges to your child, regardless of the age, presenting a new skill, anything like that, positive reinforcement is very effective. And you can just kind of circle back to, hey, what are you working for? Great, this is what they're working for. How can you earn that? That's the expectation that the adult is in control of, right? And then you're also putting it on the kid. Positive reinforcement also promotes, how to teach accountability and ownership, which I think is really important skills that all individuals, regardless of age, need to develop. And it's something, unfortunately, that we have to learn and teach our kiddos, right? And positive reinforcement is just one way that we can help navigate that and facilitate that skill trait. Okay, so that's one example. For like my middle schoolers or even high schooler, like my middle schoolers, I would say I would use a lot of words, like instead of the pictures, because the pictures are more so geared for like toddlers or individuals who just can't, read at that moment, regardless of their age. The pictures are really helpful. And again, that's called PECs. Now for like our middle schoolers, words are really helpful. For our high schoolers, having a visual token board can kind of be like, childish because they're like grown up.
I have one though.
Yeah.
That she always says, I love my star chart.
And that's fine.
I love my star chart.
That's fine.
And apparently she has them all over her room.
Good for her. No,
for all
that's
different
good.
things. It really just depends.
Depends on the kid. That's why I said it can, right? So just be mindful, like we don't want to assume.
Yeah, she creates them for herself actually.
There you go. And so some people really like the visuals, especially with the high schoolers who are a little bit more older, or even the middle schoolers who are a little bit more independent and mature. I definitely think that you want to cater to this so that it's age appropriate as well. You don't want to seem like you're trying to make this super childish for your
And there
your
are ways to make it like, again, you can have a high schooler who has like a chart,
yes,
but maybe it's much more in depth. Whereas like your primary age kid, like in elementary school, it's very simple. And we, again, Teachers Pay Teachers is one of our favorite sites to get these. I mean, you can create them yourself. You can get them off of Google,
Amazon,
Pinterest, but Teachers Pay Teachers has so many different resources for this type of reward system, and they are as simple as you need them to be or as complicated. They have like for the littles, for high school, all kinds
adults
of
even.
I highly recommend. And there's a lot of free. I mean, there are some that cost like $3 or something like that, but then there are so many free ones that are downloadable as well.
Absolutely. And I know I mentioned token boards, and I know Bethany mentioned like sticker charts and things like that. Token boards can look very, very different. You can earn stickers like on a chart that is created, right? Like what's the expectation? I have to clean my room, or I need to, I don't know, like what are some other goals for kids?
Well, and I'll kind of maybe like talk a little bit more about like some of the ones that I use for Pip. But really quick before moving on to that, it just popped into my head. I want to mention, because I get a lot of clients or clients' parents or whoever's bringing the child in, and they're like, we've tried charts, we've tried boards.
Oh yeah, I was going to.
They haven't worked. If we're not using it appropriately or effectively, and I'll explain a little bit more about how to do that in just a moment, they will not work.
Right.
Okay. So it's more than just creating it and saying we're going to do this. We have in my house what we call like a family meeting. Like we've had so many different charts, because once we tackle one unwanted behavior, there's another unwanted behavior as we go through the different seasons of life, the different developmental stages. And so we have used so many different charts and reward systems in our home. And every time I start a new one, I create it. And then we have our family meeting where we go over it in detail with everyone involved. So any adult that's going to be implementing it, and my child who's going to be following it, so that she and everyone involved clearly understands how to implement it. And like for my parents, like when I will literally like create the chart sometimes with them and then put the instructions verbatim at the bottom of the chart for them to refer back to, because we're listening and we're taking in all the information, but then we get home and maybe we forgot like one small piece, but that one small piece is the piece that if you don't do will cause it not to be efficient, right? Or effective. Also, maybe grandma or grandpa who live next door and help you out, you know, weren't in the meeting or weren't at the family meeting. And so they need the directions at the bottom to refer back to until it's been done several, you know, times.
It's not just about having these, you know, resources and implementing positive reinforcement. It's about doing it consistently and effectively in order to get the desired results that you want.
It has to be done the same way each time.
Yeah, it's very systematic.
So correct.
I think that's what you're trying to say.
Yes, it is very systematic.
Yeah.
With my daughter, and I'll explain. So let's say one time when she was, I think she was like 5 or 6, and she was going through it big time because we had just sold our house. We were living in a rental house. Her grandparents were living with us in the rental house. There were so many changes. And, you know, her one or more of her 4 F's from our last video, I encourage you to watch our last video, the 4 F's of anxiety, you know, were being triggered and activated. And her reaction was fight at this moment in time. And so every time we told her to do something, or told her she couldn't have something, or told her not right now, or not today, or just no, she would throw something or yell at us or stomp off, slam the door. And we originally were like taking things away, which was not effective because in the moment she was upset that we were taking something away. But kids are so resilient that they bounce back and then they'll find something else to occupy themselves with. So it just wasn't really getting rid of that unwanted behavior long term. And then I was like, oh yeah, I'm a therapist. Let me use some of the tools I actually use with my kids at work. And so I created this chart, and the behavior was for accepting no.
Right.
So I put Monday through Sunday, you know, at the top. On the the right-hand side, I put accepting no as the behavior. And then at the bottom, I put the directions. And then we sat down for our family meeting. I also made a list of what, because she could read at this time. She had just learned. And this is where PECS could come into play. If you have a child who cannot read, you could put the pictures. But we sat down, and first, as a family, we discussed what accepting no meant and what it looked like. So we would ask her, what, you know, what does that look like? Give us some examples. Like when you ask me if you can have a snack and I tell you after dinner or later, that's an example of accepting no. When we tell you maybe on Friday, not today, that's an example of me saying no, you know, and, you know, we went over all the different examples, or just like a straight up no, like you can't do that or you can't have that. And then we had a list of behaviors that we had been seeing every time we were telling her she couldn't do something or couldn't have something. So kicking, throwing, stomping our feet, slamming doors, yelling at people. And we went over all of the behaviors that we had been seeing and said, these are the behaviors that we do not want to see. So when we say no to something, or we say you can't have it, or you not right now, or whatever, and you do not do any of these behaviors that we just went over, and then I'll go over them again just to be clear, we are going to praise you in that moment. Yay, good job. You accepted no. We are going to put a star in that column. Let's say it's Monday in the column, and she's going to get that immediate positive reinforcement in the moment, okay? And then later in the evening, we're going to revisit this chart again.
Yeah.
So I also, my husband and I went to the store we got 2 rolls of nickels so that you don't want to wait and have them later. But then we told her at night when we revisit, you know, after the day, you've been getting your stars all day, we've been giving you the verbal praise. And then right before bed, we're going to count all your stars. Let's say you got 18 of them today, because I say no a lot. Then we're going to give her 18 nickels, and she gets to take those nickels and then put them in her little like piggy bank or whatever it is that she's saving. And then at the end of the week, we give her the option to either spend it or save it for the following week and add 2. So she's getting 3 different routes basically of the positive reinforcement. She's getting it in the moment verbally and with the physical star. Then she's getting the nickels at the end of the day. And then at the end of the week, she gets to spend them. So there's 3 different routes. Another tip is if you're doing something along these lines, have the chart, print out several copies, have one on the fridge, one in your purse, give one to the grandparents and explain this to them as well. So that even if you're out and about, if you catch them doing something well, you can reward it in that moment. You can pull out the chart in Publix or whatever grocery store you're at. That's the one that we have, and do it right there in the moment. Because if you're like, yay, good job, and then you don't write it down, and then you forget, you get busy, it is not going to work. It has to be systematic.
Yes. I have a client that, will have a lot of clients that use positive reinforcement. It looks different for every single one of my clients. But this one client in particular, it kind of like brought to light something that you were kind of like talking about. They went on Amazon and bought like 100 of like these little tokens, right? And then the babysitter has some, grandma and grandpa have some. They're really close, like aunt and uncle have some because they stay with them quite frequently. Mom and dad have some on their person and in their cars, right? And then there's even some in the backpack because even the teacher's in on it. So he'll go to like school, take it like a little Ziploc, like on a weekly basis so that the teacher has access to it. So like everyone's on board, right? And then I even have some at my office that they give me like my own little Ziploc. So this child is actually earning, but his thing is more so for like transitions. So his expectation is he's going to transition well with no behaviors. Okay. And we already went through this. Like they had their own version of a family meeting, except they had multiple meetings. So they had a family meeting at first, right? So they had a family meeting with just like the parents and the child with the sibling present. Okay. Because the sibling's in on it too. And then they had like another meeting, like a whole big family meeting with the extended family members, like the grandparents, the babysitter was there, and the aunt and uncle that they usually babysit or stay with often was present as well for another conversation. Then they had another conversation at the 504 meeting with myself present and the teacher. And that's also when like the first set of tokens were distributed. So this is like really like, it takes a village, guys. Right?
Yeah, definitely.
And it's super important, like what Bethany was saying, to have these meetings because you want to go over what the expectation is, what that looks like, what the behaviors, like the unwanted, the undesired, the maladaptive behaviors are looking like.
Yeah, because a lot of kids will be like, well, I'm supposed to be good. Like when we're like, what are you working for? Mean? I'm supposed to be good. And it's like, okay, well, give me examples of that because what does that mean? And they really need to understand, you know, with solid examples that, you know, you go over with them what those are so that you can actually, you know, do the behaviors and, you know, get the reward.
Right. And so for this particular child, whenever he gets a total of 15 tokens, he immediately has access, if he chooses to engage in like a treasure box. There's a treasure box at his home, and there's a treasure box at school that the teacher was totally on board with, because typically they have like different things to earn the treasure box at school, but he has like his own thing through his 504 accommodations plan that she was acceptance of, the teacher, which I think is fantastic. So as long as he gets his certain amount of tokens, he can earn all the tokens within one day. He can earn all the tokens within 2 days. It doesn't really matter. As soon as he earns that 15, he can cash in those 15 for that. However, if he gets and decides to keep the 15, just keep earning, if he gets 50 tokens by Friday after school, he can choose whatever he wants for dinner. And he's done that a handful of times. Like, be mindful that this child is 6. So one time it was ice cream. And here's the thing, so that the parents can still stay in control, they already have a pre-written out list, right, of preferred things or the motivators, if you will. And so on that list, it's picking what you would like for dinner, and then they gave their own examples that the parents are comfortable with, which did include ice cream, and their version of ice cream is like a healthy, high in protein frozen yogurt. But hey, I mean, the kiddo loves it,
What
right?
a rip off.
The kiddo loves it. Or even like having breakfast for dinner is on there as well. Like fun things, right? And I just want to be very specific when I'm saying this, because I don't want parents watching this like, well, my kid is just going to eat a whole tub of unhealthy ice cream. Remember, the kid could create what this list looks like, and he or she can say verbally, and you write it down or put the pictures if they're too young to read. And, but the kid can put anything that they like and desire. Remember, it's their list. But when it's time to reward, the parent is really in control, because what this looks like is when you get a certain amount of stickers or stars or tokens or pluses or whatever they're earning as their immediate gratification, right? They can cash it in for something on that list. But the parent gets to choose, right? Like when you get 15 tokens, you can pick something from that treasure box. But who's supplying that treasure box? Mom and dad, right? Or whoever the guardian is, correct? You get to pick what's for dinner. But on that list, there's already options like, okay, what would you like from this? And it's like fun things that the kiddo typically likes or wants or desires, but the parent's still in control here, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So I just want to like be very mindful and just kind of like state that directly.
Yeah. So with that being said, I guess, I really briefly want to touch on, just some examples of behaviors to positively reinforce. So we've talked about what it is, how it works, how it's helpful, just some suggestions on how to implement it. But like, what behaviors are we reinforcing? And I want to touch on this because like some are obvious and then some are not as obvious, right? So I like being a good friend. Like that's a big one in my home. Is we're always working on being a good friend. Yeah. It's a lot to learn how to do this. And it takes a lot of conversation, and it takes a lot of praise, and it's our job to help our kids navigate this, right? Because they don't know. And kids can be very self-absorbed. And me, and then, but they do also want friends. And so it's our job to help them learn how to do that and notice when they are doing that and praise them, so that the behaviors are being repeated.
Right.
Being a good sport. Okay. So I have had so many kids, maybe it's because, I don't know, like kids love board games. I know kids love video games too, but they really love board games. And we play a lot of board games in session, not just for fun and rapport building, but also to show them how to follow the rules, how to be a good sport, both how to
be good at
disappointment when you don't win, but also how to be good at winning and not, like rub it in everyone's face and gloat. It's okay to be proud of yourself and to get like a pat on the back, but we don't need to like rub it in everyone's face and, I won, I'm better than you, any of that kind of verbiage. Right. So again, we have to help them navigate how to do this. Then we also need to, at the end of the game, good job. That was so much fun. It was so much fun playing Sorry with you. I would really love to do that again with you. Or I bet lots of kids like to play games with you. You're really good at like, accepting defeat, or you're a really gracious winner, things along those lines. obviously completing chores. A lot of people have like allowance, or just, but I mean, verbal praise is great too. Thanks for your help. It's always so good to have you around. I have so much to do, and it's just really nice to have an extra set of hands.
You're such a good helper.
Right, exactly. Complying with a request. So we have chore lists, but then often as parents, I mean, at least I do, just something like, can you help me like bring some of the groceries in? Right. That's not on the chore list, but can you just help me with this? Or, can you take the dog out? Like, it really probably should be her job, but, it's always us. But, like at least once a day, like if I'm busy, I'm like, hey, can you take him out? You know what I mean? Like, so I can get this done. And she doesn't love doing it, because it takes her away from something that she was enjoying doing. But, I always really try to thank you so much. That was so helpful. And it allowed me to do this for you, because it freed up some of my time.
Right.
Another one that I'm thinking about is just, compromising or being flexible, okay? Because this is hard for everyone. Again, going back to that egocentric child, like, I don't know about you, but like my daughter, it's like, hey, let's go to this restaurant. I don't want to go to that restaurant. I want to go here. I don't like that restaurant. And she does like it, by the way. It's just in that moment, she wanted to go somewhere else. So if she's not complaining and she just says, you know what? Okay, let's do that. Like, thank you for being so, flexible. And thank you for like going with my flow, like today, so for compromising and being flexible. I think that's one that's not as obvious, like to, positively reinforce. Obviously accepting no is a big one that we really want to work on. Playing nicely with a sibling, sharing.
Or just being a good sibling.
Right. Using our manners. Those are more obvious ones. Waiting patiently, the kids and the interrupting. That one's a big, big one. Transitioning from and when we say transitioning, we're talking about like non-preferred or from preferred to non-preferred activities.
Right.
So, your child's watching TV and you're like, hey, like we need to like start getting ready, like to go, but they're watching TV. So that's, that can typically be like, a door opening for, an argument, right? Or leaving the playground. When Piper was little, leaving the playground. It's
hard.
Even when I gave warnings, like we're leaving in 10 minutes, now we're leaving in 5 minutes. It doesn't matter. They're still upset. They're still upset when you're leaving. But if you start working on that and praising them when they are complaining less or not throwing a tantrum or whatnot, they'll start to repeat that behavior more often because they like the attention and the positive reinforcement. And lastly, I really want to focus on positively reinforcing when your child's putting in effort, because we give a lot of praise when goals get accomplished, when we do things right, when tasks get completed, when it's done well, when we win the game. But how often are we saying to our kiddos, like, I'm just proud of you for trying, like, way to go. I wouldn't have had the guts to do that. Or that could have really made me want to give up and you kept going, in my home, we have high expectations, for certain things like being kind, being a good person and being respectful. And school is realistically her only job. Now, with that being said, we focus more on the effort regarding school than the actual grades. So I remember we got a progress report home, and I think it shows like every quiz grade, every test grade, every homework, classroom work, all of that. And she was disappointed in herself because she had gotten like a low B or an 80. She's a little bit of a perfectionist. And I said, hey, like, no big deal. Like, and she's like, oh, but it's not an A and it's this and that. And I said, you know what I'm looking at? I said, I'm looking at these 2 grades. And I kind of pointed out her classroom work, which was 100%, and her homework, which was also 100%.
Right.
And they don't have to be 100%. But my point is, I was focusing and showing her that my focus
is your effort.
If you're trying. And these 2 grades that are good, and the B is good too, but apparently not to her, is like you're showing like you're trying, you're giving it your all. Yeah. So like I don't care, what your test grade is, because I'm looking at the effort that you're displaying regarding, your grades.
Right.
So I really, really can't, say it enough that we really need to be praising our kids, noticing our kids' efforts, noticing our kids are trying to do well. Yes. They're trying to make the right decision. They're trying to follow directions. They're trying to complete tasks, and just giving them that praise for doing just that, even if it doesn't always get done the way that we're hoping it does.
Right, because I think it's important to acknowledge the journey, right? And like praise the journey rather than just praising at the finish line.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's kind of like when you're running a marathon, because I don't do that, but I've seen it on TV. So I'm not speaking from experience, but I'm speaking from like what I visually see, especially with like the Olympics happening a couple months ago. Yeah. But when they're like running at a marathon, like they have people along the way, not just at the finish line. No, but seriously, they have people along the
running, like cheering them on the whole time, or like at each stop point.
Like there's like different signs, and they're just kind of like cheering you on, which is really helpful to get to like that desired outcome, right? And here's the thing I always tell all of my clients. Our goal is not perfection, it's progress. And progress does not look like a steady trend. It's like all wonky, and it includes ups and downs, right? And so instead of by being discouraged by the lows or the downs, if you will, embrace them and learn from them. And I think that's kind of like what you mean by
absolutely
praising the
effort,
which is super important in order to continuously strive for the desired outcome that you're wanting overall, right? So no, I really like that. I really like that a lot.
So how can we like link these behaviors and positive, how can we link the rewards to the behavior?
Okay, so linking the rewards to the behaviors. So are you talking about like the list that the child creates?
Yeah, basically. So,
well, they're kind of like working for it, right? Like you're setting that expectation, like the parent or the guardian or the teacher, they're like, hey, remember, before we start this thing, like, what are we working for? Like, what is the goal, right? Like, how can you achieve this? And kind of like circle back to like what we said earlier in this video, we're having these meetings, whether they're family meetings or meetings with like at the school, or just like having a conversation, right, with these kiddos to understand that, to make sure that they understand the expectation, what that means to you as the adult. Because you want this, like I said before, Beth and I both said it actually, like you want this to be very intentional, and just make sure that they understand and leave room for questions as well, like to kind of address it in that moment so that there is no gray area. It's very understood from all parties involved what they're working for and how to earn it.
Yeah, I think it's the what you're working for. And the reason why I bring up like linking the rewards to the behaviors is because I also want to bring up the importance of like consistency in positive reinforcement. So obviously, like you mentioned, like earlier, like when learning a new skill, but also like we don't want them to get discouraged when they're trying to change, I guess, like from the unwanted behavior to the replacement behavior, because even if we find the carrot and they're like on board 100% and they want that reward and they want to display the replacement behavior more than the unwanted behavior, I have to be honest in saying that the unwanted behavior has been working for them thus far anyway, or they wouldn't be repeating it.
Right. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to work for them either. It could just be habitual.
And that's what I mean too. Like they're getting that need met.
Yeah.
And it's habitual, and so it's easier for them to fall back into that unwanted behavior to get the need met instead of using the new replacement behavior, which is harder for them to do, or they would have been doing it in the first place.
Right. So that's when like coping strategies kind of.
Exactly. Well, and just again, like the consistency. So if we we have to make it worth their while, right? If we're only recognizing, again, the good behaviors once in a while, and we're focusing and redirecting all of the maladaptive or unwanted behaviors more often, they're going to fall back into the habitual old patterns and just keep doing the unwanted behaviors. So I guess like I could share like another way to do this. Like for me, like obviously like, yes, as parents, like and you know, like if you have like a friend or like a spouse or someone to hold you accountable, like, or hold each other accountable, like for like the verbal praise and recognizing it, because we always start strong and then we kind of like get busy and we like fall off a little bit. Like I do it myself. But again, I'm like big on the visual reinforcement charts because it helps me stay consistent. So for example, we currently have in our home, we have 2 different charts going on. And one is for sleeping in your own bed and going to sleep in your own bed without like giving us an argument. Because again, to talk about like when we were in the rental, it was much smaller than the house that we moved out of, and we were kind of just surviving and just like happy if like our daughter got to bed at a decent time, you know, so she was rested for the next day. And so a lot of times she did end up sleeping with like me and my husband because it was just easier to get her down with the situation at hand. When we moved in to our new home, it was like we had to start. She was such a good sleeper sleeping in her bed before that had happened, but we had to kind of like start from scratch. And now she was older and like more stubborn or at least better at arguing and digging in her heels. And so we started basically, you know, I think I might have mentioned it in another video. She's obsessed with these Awala water bottles. It's the cool thing to have right now. And, you know, she doesn't need them. She's got several water bottles and they're about $30 on average. And so that's a little pricey to me. So I'm like, okay, you want this. You know what? We'll come up with a reward system. And so we have, again, a Monday, you know, through Sunday chart. Because visually for me, it helps me stay consistent and it helps her visually to track it and see where she's at to not get discouraged. And we had our little family meeting and went over the expectations. Every night when we say it's time to go to bed, if you go and get in your bed and don't give us trouble about sleeping in your bed and you fall asleep on your own in your bed, like you will get a point. Now, if she gets up in the middle of the night and comes over, at that point, like we'll walk her back or whatever, and you can add something. But we're just talking about, did you not give us a hard time? And did you go to sleep in your own bed? She gets a point. When she gets 25 points, she gets her Awala. And that helps me stay consistent because I keep it on the counter in the kitchen and I have to look at it. It's by like my coffee maker, and every day I'm keeping up with it in order to stay consistent.
No, I like that.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to just like, I know you keep saying the word consistent and we've also said the word intentional, but I think that is what's going to make this effective. So whenever you notice the positive behavior, you have to immediately provide positive reinforcement, right? Because if you circle back to one of our past videos when we were talking about like the CEO of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, and when
I love that person.
I know when that CEO, whenever he or she like leaves the building or the office, if you will, that's when the alarm system kind of goes off, right? But the hippocampus is a part of the limbic system. And I encourage you guys to go watch that video if you haven't checked it out yet. It was actually really fun to make that one. But the hippocampus is actually responsible. It's in the limbic system. And it's responsible for creating like short-term memories into like long-term memories, right?
Yeah.
And so,
and that video was what one was that? Was that number 3?
I think so.
How the brain responds to stress.
Something like that. Yeah. And so definitely check that out. But anyway, so the hippocampus is like really responsible for making it from short-term to long-term memory, right? And when we are positively reinforcing a new positive behavior that we want them to exhibit more frequently to essentially replace that maladaptive behavior, by reinforcing them effectively and consistently, you're creating that, you're kind of igniting the hippocampus and promoting that reward into short term to long term, right? Mm-hmm. So that they're going to be more prone to do that. And it's really, really important to remain consistent, because you really want to see this behavior more frequently on a consistent basis as well, right? Yeah. And we want to avoid accidental positive reinforcement, which is accidentally reinforcing those negative behaviors, right?
I think attention is a good example for this one, because a lot of people tend to, like, let's say I'm on the phone, mm-hmm. okay, and my child is trying to get my attention by interrupting me while I'm on the phone, and she's coming over and I'm saying, not right now, when I'm off the phone, I'm on the phone.
You're still
I'm on the phone.
Her.
I'm giving her that attention each time, so she's getting reinforced. Yeah. And that's what you mean, I think, by accidentally, because you're not meaning to.
Right.
You're trying to set a boundary.
Yeah.
But you're reinforcing the fact that she's interrupting.
Yeah.
Whereas if you maybe removed yourself from the room and walked away, and like I'll go in my office sometimes and lock the door, which is like, and I'm not saying that your kid isn't going to come and knock, but like I do my best to ignore it, mm-hmm. so that she's not getting accidentally reinforced negatively.
Correct. And maybe we create like another video talking about the different functions of behaviors and kind of go a little bit more in depth on that. But for the purpose of this video, we definitely don't want to accidentally or unintentionally reinforce or promote or enable maladaptive or unwanted behaviors, right? So I think that's really important, but we'll stay tuned. We'll definitely, create a video. So
we'll get on that.
Yeah. So definitely like and subscribe so you get notified for that video as well. But I appreciate all of our viewers joining us as always. And thank you for joining Bethany and I on Air with B&B. And remember that your mental health matters, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye. I'm looking for somebody